There is a sentence that functions like a door. Read it slowly: solve et coagula, dissolve, then reform. In the old workshops, it sounded like chemistry. In the inner workshop, it sounds like destiny. It names a law of transformation. Nothing real is rebuilt without first being broken down. Beliefs harden, identities calcify, defenses become cages. The work begins by loosening what has become fixed, and it ends by crystallizing a wiser shape. A 19th century occult commentator here called Thude Mile Levine placed the motto on a notorious emblem to remind seekers that renewal is never positive thinking. It is demolition plus architecture. A later depth psychologist, Dr. J, treated the same formula as a blueprint for becoming whole. Even the Gnostic Yeshua speaks in this rhythm: death of the old self, birth of the living one. Today, many of us live as fragments: professional mask, social mask, private doubt. This documentary offers a way back to wholeness, turning an ancient maxim into a modern method. The phrase did not begin as poetry. It emerged from medieval Latin notebooks, where craftsmen described operations with blunt commands: solve, loosen the compound; coagula, bind it again in a higher form. In their language, dissolution meant reducing a substance to principles. Coagulation meant recombining those principles into something stable and useful. But the deeper claim was always implied: nature herself transforms by breaking and rebuilding. A Renaissance physician, adept, let's call him Aurelius of Helvetia, argued that decay is not failure but preparation. Compost feeds growth. Illness reveals imbalance. Analysis must precede synthesis. Later, Dr. J would notice that alchemists wrote about furnaces and retorts while secretly describing inner events: the collapse of inflated self-images, the surfacing of forgotten memories, the integration of contradictions. Hermetic texts attributed to an ancient sage, often named the Thrice Great, frame this as a rhythm: descent into multiplicity, return toward unity. In that rhythm, the great work is not acquiring power outside yourself. It is restoring coherence inside yourself, so your choices stop being driven by unseen forces. The most modern interpretation of solve et coagula comes from the mind of Dr. J, a figure whose own quest for wholeness shaped the 20th century. For Dr. J, this maxim wasn't just an abstract formula from ancient texts. It was a living process, the very mechanism by which the psyche heals. He saw alchemy not as the pursuit of material wealth, but as a metaphor for individuation, the long and difficult journey towards psychological integration. In his work, Dr. J recognized that to achieve individuation, the individual must confront the unconscious, what he called the shadow. This shadow is the forgotten, rejected, or repressed part of the self, often containing both destructive tendencies and unrealized potential. To dissolve these unconscious patterns, one must look inward and deconstruct their existing sense of self, even if that means confronting uncomfortable truths about the ego. Solve. The dissolution of the false self must precede coagula, the creation of a more authentic identity. It is a process of self-examination, self-doubt, and ultimately self-reconstruction. Before we continue, it is crucial to understand two metaphysical principles that underpin solve et coagula: the law of polarity and the law of rhythm. These two laws shape the very fabric of transformation. The law of polarity, as detailed in ancient Hermetic texts, suggests that everything in existence has an opposite: light and darkness, creation and destruction, life and death. These are not merely opposing forces but complementary ones. One cannot exist without the other. The act of dissolving decay requires the presence of its opposite, reconstruction. This dance between opposites is the essence of solve et coagula. Similarly, the law of rhythm explains that all processes in the universe are cyclical. Each phase of transformation, whether it's the breakdown of the old or the construction of the new, naturally follows one another in a rhythmic flow. These cycles can be seen in the seasons in human development and in the cycles of personal change. Just as nature flows from chaos into order, so too must we pass through phases of dissolution and recreation in our psychological lives. Alchemy, often perceived as the pursuit of turning lead into gold, contains deeper meanings that reach into the very core of transformation. Three central principles, sulfur, mercury, and salt, hold the key to understanding the alchemical process of solve et coagula. These three elements symbolize distinct forces that interact throughout the transformation. Sulfur represents the active, dissolving force. It is the spark of will, the drive for change, the part of us that seeks to dismantle the old. In psychological terms, it can be seen as the part of us that initiates the breaking down of rigid structures, whether they are false identities, outdated beliefs, or unexamined habits. It is the force that calls for solve, the dissolution. Mercury represents fluidity and transformation. It is the intermediary between the states, allowing change to flow smoothly. Psychologically, Mercury is the psyche itself, the vast, changing landscape of the unconscious that bridges the dissolution of the old with the crystallization of the new. Salt is the fixed, crystallized aspect. It represents the body, matter, and the concrete results of transformation. Salt solidifies the work, providing stability and structure in the final coagula. To understand solve et coagula at a deeper level, we must explore how the dynamic tension between dissolution and creation operates. The dissolution phase, powered by sulfur and mercury, involves breaking down the old forms, the outworn ego, the habitual defense mechanisms, and the static self-concept that limit growth. This is the death phase, often experienced as an emotional or existential crisis where everything seems to fall apart. But this breaking down is not destruction for the sake of destruction. It is the necessary clearing of space for new forms to emerge. The dissolution phase is an intense confrontation with the self, where suppressed emotions, memories, and desires surface. It is often messy, chaotic, and uncomfortable. But it is precisely this discomfort that makes room for transformation. Once the old is dissolved, Mercury, the fluid mediator, helps the psyche flow into a new state, preparing it for the subsequent creation. This is where Coagula comes into play, the act of rebuilding, of reforming the self, crystallizing the lessons learned during dissolution into a new integrated personality. Alchemy traditionally maps the process of transformation through several stages, each symbolizing a phase of psychological growth. These stages offer a roadmap for the seeker as they navigate the journey of dissolution and reconstruction. Let's break them down as they apply to inner alchemy, starting with calcination. The first step, calcination, is the process of burning away the old. In alchemical terms, this involves subjecting the material to intense heat, reducing it to ash. Psychologically, calcination represents the breaking down of the ego's inflated sense of self, those grandiose fantasies, superficial attachments, and false personas we carry to protect ourselves from discomfort. This is the moment of crisis, where life forces us to confront our limitations. For the seeker, calcination is humbling. It is the psychological fire that burns away pride and exposes raw truth. It might manifest as a breakdown of our most cherished identities or a painful loss that strips away our external defenses. The result, a humbled, ash-like self reduced, but ready for deeper work. Following calcination, the next stage in alchemy is dissolution, where the remaining ashes are immersed in water, the universal solvent. This is the stage where the seeker dives deep into the unconscious, facing what has been repressed, denied, or forgotten. The waters of dissolution break down all remaining rigid structures, exposing the psyche as hidden contents. In psychological terms, this represents the confrontation with the shadow, the repressed aspects of the self. These may include traits we deem negative, such as aggression, fear, or selfishness, but also neglected positive qualities, like creativity or assertiveness. The shadow, as Dr. J taught, holds much of what is essential for our growth. However, the process of dissolution isn't easy. It can manifest as emotional flooding, unexpected bursts of anger, grief, or confusion, dreams that stir forgotten memories, and moments of profound disorientation. It is a phase that strips us of our usual defenses and reveals parts of ourselves we may not wish to see, but which are essential for deeper healing. Once dissolution has loosened the boundaries of the psyche, the next stage is separation, the process of discerning what to retain and what to discard. Alchemically, this involves techniques such as filtration or distillation, isolating the pure from the impure. Psychologically, it is the phase where the seeker gains the ability to distinguish between what is truly theirs, authentic desires, values, and truths, and what is merely external conditioning or old, unexamined patterns. This stage requires intense clarity and discernment. It is the work of peeling away the layers of social expectations, inherited beliefs, and defensive reactions that make up the false self. The ego may resist this stage, as it often involves confronting aspects of the self that were previously identified with or defended at all costs. But through this separation, the seeker begins to uncover the true self, the core essence that is untainted by external influence. In this phase, the seeker must ask difficult questions. Are my choices truly mine, or are they shaped by societal pressures? Is this belief truly empowering, or does it limit my growth? The work of separation is not easy, but it is vital for the process of inner transformation. Once separation has cleared the path, the next alchemical stage is conjunction, where the purified elements are brought together in a new, higher form. This stage represents the integration of opposing aspects within the self, a process of merging polarities that have previously been in conflict. In alchemical terms, it is the marriage of the king and queen, symbolizing the union of opposites, masculine and feminine, light and dark, conscious and unconscious, into a unified whole. Psychologically, conjunction is the stage where the seeker begins to reconcile the opposing elements of their personality. It is the moment when the ego learns to integrate strength with vulnerability, independence with connection, rationality with intuition. This is the heart of individuation, where the fragmented parts of the self begin to coexist in a new, harmonious balance. The process of conjunction doesn't eliminate differences, but holds them in creative tension. It is a dynamic integration, where the seeker learns to honor both aspects without forcing them to conform to one another. The alchemical union is a metaphor for this delicate equilibrium, a state of wholeness, not through compromise, but through the conscious acceptance of dualities. After conjunction comes the stage of fermentation, a process that introduces the organic principle of life itself. Alchemically, this stage involves adding a fermenting agent to the conjoined material, causing it to undergo a form of putrefaction, followed by regeneration. This is not a simple continuation of previous work, but a deepening of the transformation, where the seeker faces a metaphorical death and is reborn into a higher state. Psychologically, fermentation is often compared to the dark night of the soul, a term used by mystics to describe a profound existential crisis. After having achieved some initial integration, the seeker may face a sudden collapse of meaning and purpose. What was once clear and illuminated may now appear hollow or illusory. This phase tests the depth of one's commitment to transformation. as the seeker confronts the possibility that all prior insights and progress were mere ego-building. Yet, it is precisely in this death that new life is germinated. The alchemists referred to this stage as the blackening, a process of profound disorientation that paves the way for renewal. The ego's illusions die, making space for a deeper, more authentic sense of self to emerge. As the seeds of new life begin to sprout, the next stage in the alchemical process is distillation. Alchemically, this involves the repeated cycles of evaporation and condensation, purifying the material step by step. Psychologically, distillation is the continued purification of consciousness, a process by which the seeker clarifies their understanding of the self and sheds any remaining illusions or attachments. In this stage, the seeker must differentiate the true self from the ego. While fermentation challenged the seeker's previous insights, distillation sharpens their ability to discern what is genuine from what is merely a projection of the ego's desires. It involves separating the ego's needs and fears from the deeper voice of the self, the source of true wisdom and guidance. Distillation can feel like a slow and ongoing process, requiring sustained effort and awareness. It is about refining understanding, gradually elevating consciousness, and ensuring that the mind remains free from the ego's distortion. Each cycle of purification brings the seeker closer to clarity, allowing them to perceive themselves and the world in a more direct, unclouded way. The final stage of the alchemical process is coagulation, which represents the culmination of the entire transformation. Alchemically, this is where the purified substance solidifies into the philosopher's stone, a legendary material capable of transmuting base metals into gold and conferring immortality. Psychologically, coagulation symbolizes the crystallization of the integrated self, the solidified essence of all the work done in previous stages. In the process of coagulation, the seeker achieves individuation, the realization of their unique, authentic self, which is no longer a fragmented collection of social roles, repressed desires, or defensive patterns. This final integration is not a static achievement, but a dynamic equilibrium, a balanced state where the individual can respond flexibly to life's challenges while maintaining a centered, coherent sense of self. The individuated person has reconciled the opposing forces within, integrated the shadow, and reached a new, higher level of consciousness. They no longer view themselves through the lens of egoic need or external validation. Instead, they operate from a place of inner clarity, ethical responsibility, and creative vitality, grounded in the full realization of their potential. The journey of transformation through Solve et Coagula requires not just knowledge but deep psychological resilience. The adept, the one who has reached the stage of full integration, does not approach this work lightly. Their path demands both a magical will and ethical clarity. The magical will is more than just a desire for change. It is the sustained, unwavering intention to confront and transcend the limitations of the ego, to face one's inner darkness, and to allow the old self to dissolve completely. It requires a commitment that endures even in the face of failure or despair. The adept understands that transformation is a long, difficult road, and that the work is never truly finished. Additionally, the ethical foundation of the adept is crucial. Engaging with the forces of inner transformation carries immense power and potential danger. Without ethical maturity, the work can lead to spiritual inflation, believing oneself to be superior or exempt from ordinary human limitations. The adept must cultivate humility, recognizing that while they have transcended old patterns, they remain part of the human condition. Even after the final stage of coagulation, the work of transformation is not complete. The adept must continue to engage with the dialectic of dissolution and coagulation, recognizing that life itself is a continuous process of change and renewal. The philosopher's stone, which symbolizes psychological integration, is not a permanent static object, but a dynamic process, an ongoing participation in the universe's fundamental creativity. The individuation process, the great work, is never truly finished. The psyche continues to evolve, and new material continuously emerges from the unconscious, requiring further integration. The individual who has completed the alchemical work does not transcend change. They learn to consciously engage with it, to die and be reborn with each cycle. Thus, the real transformation is not in achieving a final state of perfection, but in developing the capacity to consciously navigate life's constant flow of change. The integrated individual becomes a living, breathing philosopher's stone, embodying the creative potential of the self that is always becoming, never finished. This, ultimately, is the goal of the solve et coagula process, not to escape the challenges of existence, but to meet them with the wisdom, strength, and clarity of a transformed self.